Next, I wanted to watch something really quick with you guys because I thought it looked fascinating. And I thought you guys would think it was fascinating. And it's a little bit to do with Elder Scrolls lore. Some of you may have already seen this before, but it looked really, I feel like this is a really important topic. And it's something that we should all know the answer to and we should all understand better, okay? It is the question of Argonian boobs. And what is their purpose? And I think we need to know, okay? And this is a great video, all right? And a great channel. So guys, be sure, I'll share this link again at the end. But if you enjoy the video, be sure to sub, like, and share the video with your friends, okay? Yes. Argonian boobs. Why? Right? Why? So let's find out.
When you're playing an Elder Scrolls game, you might ask yourself a couple questions, like, are there constellations really in the sky? Why don't some Argonians have belly buttons? Where do Argonian babies come from? If Argonian...
Hold on one second. The nice ocean breeze is distracting me right now, okay? Audio... There. Okay, this is better. Okay. Let's resume.
Argonians are an egg-laying, reptilian-looking species. Why do Argonian women have boobs? We as mammals have parts to create and nurture our young into adolescence.
Why do they have boobs? We need to know. You saw the Argonian Twitter post? Did you? Yeah. Oh, by the way, guys, check out my Twitter. Oh, there's a good poll. We'll talk about that after this. But
few egg-laying creatures have this. Breastfeeding is just not needed. But are Argonians exclusively egg-laying? And are they exactly reptiles? The lore can actually tell us. Let's talk about Argonian boobs. So there are three main arguments in the lore community for explaining the use of Argonian boobs. Is it breast milk, his sap, or nothing? And after we go through the evidence, I'm going to tell you what I think is most likely. But in order to explain these a little better, we have to first talk about eggs. Why? Because how a baby is born tells us a lot about how it's nurtured into adulthood. In other words, if you're laying an egg, you're not likely to be breastfeeding. Most egg layers don't actually breastfeed, and those that have a form of it, like platypus, emperor penguins, and caecilians, do it through bodily secretions. There's actually some really interesting studies we'll talk about that theorizes breastfeeding might have even phased out egg laying for mammals on an evolutionary scale. But are Argonians exclusively egg-laying creatures? The quick assumption is yes. Which is true, but only kind of true. Argonians are actually able to do live births too, depending on their need, or the will of the Hist. The Hist are the sentient trees in Blackmarsh, which created the Argonians from morphing reptiles, and have a magical connection with at least most of them, able to call on each other in times of need. We'll talk a little bit more about the Hist a little later, but I want to turn to Bethesda's Pete Hines when he was asked about Argonian eggs in 2003. Argonians are oviviparous. They don't lay eggs like reptiles. Note that lady Argonians have big bumps on their chests. Well, Argonian eggs definitely
have seen eggs.
And we see this clearly in Elder Scrolls Online. So maybe he's implying something else. Like, maybe they just don't lay eggs in the same way as reptiles. When a creature is oviviparous, like he says, it means eggs are created, but they're carried inside the mother. When the babies hatch, the mothers give birth to them as if it were live. We'll do it live! Yeah, it's an old quote, but this oviviparity can actually be supported by the fact that Argonians don't have belly buttons in most of the Elder Scrolls games, right up to the Elder Scrolls Online. It sounds really trivial, but no other race shares this belly button history. Belly buttons come from the umbilical cord.
I didn't notice that.
Babies can get their nutrients while they're in the womb, but for an egg layer, the egg itself is packed with nutrients enough. That's what the egg yolk is. So even if the egg hatches while inside the mother, the babies are good. Some animals even support these babies by secretions in their uterus. Fun fact, this is also called histotrophy, a connection to the Blackmarsh Hist in name, perhaps? We can expand this with another developer comment, this time from Bethesda writer Mark Nelson. Note how smoothly open to interpretation this is. Never
this is deep, right?
The adaptability of Argonians, or more specifically, the power of the Hist to allow Argonians to adapt. I wouldn't expect to hear an Argonian born in Skyrim mention being hatched, nor would I expect to hear more transient Argonians speak about laying eggs. However, in warmer climates and places with established, stable, and permanent communities, you would likely see a great number of eggs.
Right, Mark?
Well, it's pretty well accepted now that most Argonians in Black Marsh lay their eggs in pools of sap below histories. But based on this information, this just isn't the case for all Argonians. Yeah, it's a developer comment, which is not ideal for when discerning what's canon, but Argonians will have lives outside of Black Marsh, and their egg behaviors will need to reflect that. As Mark Nelson has said before, ultimately, all live at the whim of the Great Root. As stated before, the Hist are those sentient trees in Black Marsh which created the Argonians by morphing reptiles. They have a magical connection with most of them and are able to call...
So basically what he said so far is some Argonians are born, some are laid in eggs. It's up to the Hist tree. Because we've seen their eggs, but also sometimes they give birth. So the history is the decider.
Need. Like when the Oblivion Crisis happened, it's on record that the Hist called on Argonians to return home, get buffed up by the Hist, and defend Black Marsh. For some, the Hist skin ability in the games is proof enough that the relationship works. But
and that's the lore you guys always hear me talk about, where I say like the Argonians invaded, who was it, Dagon's realm, and pushed his forces back. And they kicked his ass so hard that he ended up closing the portals that connected Black Marsh to Oblivion. And it was because the Hist Super Saiyaned the Argonian warriors and then sent them into battle. I mean, so the Hist is really capable of some really crazy stuff in Elder Scrolls lore.
Both ways. The Hist provides, like a parent.
It's not just a tree, guys.
Worship, protect, and respect the Hist as gift givers and creators of the race. Both reap the benefits. To keep the connection strong, Argonians in Black Marsh hatch their eggs by pools of Hist sap. The eggs, we can see in the game, even seem to hint
Invasion's canceled, yeah.
extra Hist nutrients by appearance alone. As far as the big bumps on their chests, well, that's what we're going to discover today. So let's get into it. The three big theories in the lore community is that Argonian boobs either contain breast milk, Hist sap, or nothing. First, let's discuss the breast milk theory. This one is not as unreasonable as one might think. After all, the Parable of Becoming, explained in a Lawrence Shtick Q&A, states that the Hist created Argonians in the image of Man and Mer. It's not impossible that this extends to how their young are nurtured, and there's really not much contradicting it, actually. Even though Argonians come from eggs, plenty of egg layers
She's in the maid outfit.
Young through skin secretion, even creatures with mammary glands like platypus. Some scientists, like Olav Oftedal at the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center, believe that breastfeeding milk has ancient origins dating back to the time before mammals. As he observed, most prehistoric fish in the land before time had porous, soft eggshells. This allowed for the easy exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the embryo and the surrounding air. The problem was, when the first land creatures walked the earth, some eggs became too dry or hot, so the hard shell of modern birds and reptiles was developed for protection. But other creatures kept making porous eggs, transferring water and nutrients to their egg spawn. This is seen in creatures today, like the coqui frogs. Over time, these secretions developed into a fattier, milkier substance. Olaf believes this is why the breast developed, and as it developed over time, the nutrients in the yolk of the egg became less important and phased out. We talked about eggs produced by Argonians sometimes hatching inside the mother, so maybe depending on how this happens, breast milk can serve as a supplement to that egg yolk. The very presence of breasts can help support this, and it's not a very far-fetched idea, especially if Argonians were created in the image of Man and Mer by the histories from Black Marsh reptiles. But herein lies one of the problems with the...
Which is another lore like reference they were talking about. He just kind of talked on how one theory is that the history made the crocodiles, right? Their ancestors. Basically, Argonians used to be crocodiles, lizards, whatever. And the idea is that the history transformed them to look like humans, so that they better fit the world that they were living in. You know, walking and talking crocodile. It's gonna be more socially acceptable if it has boobs, basically.
Breast milk theory as well. The histories did craft Argonians from the image of Man and Mer, but they did it with living reptiles. We know Argonians were once reptiles. Even a quest in the Elder Scrolls Online has you helping an existential Argonian Merkwatcher into returning to her alleged past life as a
That I am not an Argonian. I am a crocodile. This lifetime. Oh, so yeah. Wait, what does it say? This lifetime I've borrowed the form of another, but my true form is calling me home. I must return to the river. Dude, it's a crocodile in Elder Scrolls Online. Look, ESO reverence.
Has you helping an existential Argonian Murkwatcher into returning to her alleged past life as a crocodile. Mayor Glim in Lord of Souls talks about a vision in Umbriel where he spent his life as a lizard until he ingested his sap. The in-game author of Notes on Racial Philology in Morrowind has the opinion that
ingested list sap. So regular lizard ingests his sap, turns into Argonian. Basically, how Argonians work.
Argonians should be classified with certain tree-dwelling lizards in Blackmarsh, and the Argonian account documents some Argonians looking more like snakes or frogs to some looking like an assortment of reptiles mashed into one race. Most of the games up to Skyrim also note Argonians as a reptilian race, but to complicate matters, they have gills too, so... If Argonians are more like reptiles and not mammals, though, can they even have mammary glands? If we're going off an evolutionary picture, most reptiles, like crocodiles, do not lay softshell eggs, and don't even secrete supplementary nutrients from the skin. Oftedal's breast milk evolutionary theory would not support breast for Argonians in this case, so why should we expect the Hist mutation of Argonians to just suddenly conjure up breast milk out of thin air? This is just another reason why the Hist sap boobs theory can be a little more compelling. If the Hist injected the first Argonians with their magical sap, surely it's more likely this sap fluid would be present in their bodies, not a milk that never existed in their evolutionary scale in the first place. According to Lord of Souls, and alluded to by the Argonian account, eggs come in all sorts depending on Blackmarsh tribe. Our Elder Scrolls...
Wait, do you guys know what this is? What's this place? Floating up here behind the tower. Do you guys know what this place is in lore? It's your house? Oh, okay.
To by the Argonian account, eggs come in all sorts depending on Blackmarsh tribe. Our Elder Scrolls Online...
It's Umbriel? Is it really? Zeal from Chrono... Is Umbriel? It's 12,000 crafts. Oh, God damn it.
Actually only shows one type of egg. One that seems very hard, like a reptile's, yet made for extra nutrient intake. Clearly, this intake could be in the form of uterine secretions we mentioned earlier, but it's also pretty well documented that Argonians in Blackmarsh typically lay their eggs by pools of Hist sap for the ultimate Argonian nutritional experience. Which brings us nicely into the second argument. Number 2, Argonian boobs contain Hist sap. This is by far the most popular one I've seen when Googling this topic.
Hist sap.
I'll first go over why it's such an appealing theory, because even apart from the little bit I mentioned earlier,
I wonder if there's any lore about what happens when non-reptiles ingest Hist sap. Is there any record of that? Like, what happens when like a human being ingests it? Like, were there any effects, side effects?
it can actually make a lot of rational sense. Argonians in Blackmarsh have a very...
There's a quest in Stonefalls about it. Do you remember what happens? It's a funny quest. I vaguely remember something like that. What are the side effects? You'll gladly be a test subject. You're ready to suck on some Hist sap. Yeah. The dude hallucinates and gets addicted. Wow. Okay. So not exactly desired effects for most. Okay.
Very special relationship with the Hist. Some believe Argonians are subpar versions of themselves without exposure to Hist sap. Take the case of Jarit, for example. The in-game book about him in the Elder Scrolls Online, written by an Argonian healer, shows him being born away from the Hist is to be born without something essential. He is noted as being disadvantaged, unable to read certain social cues, and deprived of emotional intuition. He was born into slavery. While he might function just fine in other communities, maybe even more than other Argonians, he is no Blackmarsh Argonian raised by the Hist. Now you might think this could just be a result of being raised in slavery by the Dark Elves, and yeah, maybe, but amazingly enough, members of the lore community with autism have commented on Jarit's story and completely connected with the character. And then, ZeniMax's Matt Fyror in a 2018 interview confirmed Jarit and other characters in ESO being on the spectrum. Let's look into this though. Autism is a developmental disorder of the fetus, and as we know, Argonian eggs in Blackmarsh are placed beneath histories to soak up in their sap until they hatch. So it's not really unreasonable to assume Argonians need the Hist to develop normally. There may be no cure for autism in the real world, but all Jarit had to do in his quest was commune with the Hist. The Hist just plainly seems to be needed for every stage of Argonian development. Traveling New Woman, an Argonian in Morrowind, even explains how she received her name and gender after licking the bowl of the Hist tree. How However, the defects of not breastfeeding in real life are almost entirely metabolic and nutritional, in no way similar to the effects of autism. None of these stories are actually any real indication of Argonians needing to get these HISS nutrients via breastfeeding. It actually makes me think opposite. The fact that an Argonian born and raised outside of Blackmarsh exhibits these behaviors without proximity to HISS could tell us that his mother most certainly did not have HISS sap boobs on reserve to serve as a replacement. Breast milk? Maybe. But breast sap? Not for Jareed. As for Blackmarsh Argonians, why would they need HISS sap breasts at all if they have all the HISS sap they already need in Blackmarsh? What reason would the HISS have to give Argonians a breast of HISS sap? If anything, that might actually dissuade Argonians from communing with HISS trees as much. Jareed isn't the only mentioned case of an Argonian born outside of Blackmarsh. There are plenty others, including a half-Argonian son of Count Chestrian on the Shivering Isles. These stories are proof that Argonians can be born and raised outside of Blackmarsh, but not proof of Argonian HISS sap breastfeeding. Those born away are simply without a strong connection to the HISS, and different to those born in Blackmarsh. Nothing more. You might not even be able to tell a foreign-born Argonian apart in normal society. Even being egg layers, transient Argonians will still exist, but all live at the whim of the Great Root. Mark Nelson really designed them to adapt to everything. Never underestimate the adaptability of Argonians, or more specifically, the power of the HISS to allow Argonians to adapt. And if Argonians are oviviparous, eggs can be hatched within the mother. According to all our sources, eggs are only laid if they're under HISS trees in Blackmarsh so that the eggs can absorb the HISS sap. So if eggs outside of Blackmarsh happen, they get hatched inside the mother and not laid. Inside the mother, this would be the time for that HISS sap. And if it is, it must be through uterine secretion, or histotrophy, because Argonians don't have belly buttons in the games, so there's no umbilical cord. And this secretion is all the more possible because the HISS runs through all Argonians anyway. So, HISS sap in the boobs? I don't think so.
What was I Googling when I found this video? Okay, I'll tell you exactly how that happened. Okay, so yesterday I made this post yesterday on Twitter, right? Which race would make the best bard? The Argonian, because they have great tails. And then I made this post while I was streaming, so then I just like Googled sexy Argonian, threw it in here, right? And so then Google's like, oh, Lucky is interested in sexy Argonians. And so then today, this morning, I wake up and in my YouTube feed is Argonian boobs video. And that's what we're watching right now. This is how this happened. Yeah. So that's, you were wondering how we got to be watching Argonian boobs today? There it is, man. It's this picture right here. Yeah.
So there's just no need. Even post-hatched
Sus likely story.
Like with traveling new woman.
I was not YouTubing Argonian boobs, okay? This is not how this happened.
Conservative. Almost a ritual decided by the HISS itself. And if there is a need for the egg to be nurtured by the HISS, well, then the breast just isn't the place to do it anyway. You can't breastfeed an egg. But according to all of our sources, the egg stage seems to be by far the most important stage that would really need the HISS sap. If there's anything in the boobs, this video has me convinced that it's gotta be breast milk. It's the only thing that makes sense to me for a species made in a homeland already covered in HISS sap and the magical energies of the Great Root. And those born away from it clearly already suffer withdrawals. Why would they have those withdrawals if their mothers had a ready supply of HISS sap already? This leads us to the third and final theory.
Sex appeal.
Are just for show.
This is what I've always said.
It's the big theory I see around lore community, and it's the one that's not often talked about, but what I feel to be actually the most plausible and backed up. It's the theory that the boobs are nothing. They're just there. It's not exciting, but the HISS really created Argonians to be made in the image of Man and Mer. This could support the other two cases just as well, but when you see that egg-laying habits of Argonians' ancestral reptiles haven't really changed, why should breastfeeding be introduced at all? Is there really a biological reason for the first two arguments to exist? And what advantages would a ready supply of HISS sap be after hatching if Argonians born away from Blackmarsh seem to exhibit deficiencies anyway? And with eggs, the fact that we don't see belly buttons proves an egg theory alone. And with eggs comes a completely different developmental cycle to other humanoids. Olaf Oftedal's evolutionary research shows us that reptiles generally having hard shell eggs indicate that breastfeeding isn't important to supplement the yolk anyway. Again, all sources point to the egg itself needing direct His nutrients, which tells me that there's really no need for the breast to be involved anyway. Argonians are oviviparous, unlike most reptiles, but are such because of the will of the Hist anyway. They are designed to be adaptable, even if disadvantaged a little when far away from their creators. Maybe the Hist even purposefully disadvantaged Argonian slaves in Morrowind to make Dark Elves believe that the home of the Hist wasn't worth conquering. Who knows? The Hist could have simply seen an elven woman when creating the Argonians and took the form alone to shape its creation. And plenty of creatures on Earth have physical features scientists believe to be for the sole purpose of attracting a mate. Take female scaleparous lizards or the bird of paradise. Not to mention the colors and rituals showing off these features we see in certain birds. The Hist very well could have noticed different parts on humanoid women and just decided the reason they had them. We know that Argonians have boobs and bras in games after Morrowind, but maybe they're there because sex appeal. After all, some believe if it weren't for that, bras wouldn't be such a cultural standard in the real world. Also, the teeth. It's been brought up before, but it's pretty fair to mention that Argonians have pretty sharp teeth. And even if an Argonian hadn't developed teeth yet, that reptilian snout doesn't exactly seem like the suckling type, like a dog's might be. And this is supported with Daggerfall's and Morrowind's lack of a real nipple. You might not be inclined to take those sources as gospel canon, but there is no areola on those bad boys to prevent infection. I want to end with a caveat, because this video today went into a lot of theory territory. If you're still convinced at any one of these theories, it's okay. There's really no official, definitive source on Argonian boobs. The goal here is to explore evidence and deduce some educated assumptions, with a little science thrown in. We can still have our own headcanon and may never be proven wrong with Argonians. It's as if the lore around Argonians are as adaptable as the Argonians themselves, and it seems to be designed this way. In 2011, a question was asked to Pete Hines at Bethesda. Does Bethesda consider obscure texts and developer comments as actual lore or canon? To which he answered, it depends. This is the guy who said Argonians are oviviparous, sending Argonian lore experts on an inquisition against anyone who thought otherwise. When we're talking about lore and what's canon, I think Todd Howard said it best in this recent interview with the UESP Wiki. What's the order of priority? If you saw it on the screen, that's number one. That's the most truth. If you read it in game, that's the second truth. If you read it in an official thing outside the game in a manual, that's the third. If you read it from a fan on the internet, that's way down there. That's like not on the list, right? But that's the main three. On the screen, something you see happen, regardless of what game it is or when it came out, that for us is primary. A book in the game is second. And then a book that's official outside the game is third. Yeah, we can still make a couple of deductions based on what we do know, and I'd love to hear about them in the comments section if I've helped inspire that. But at the end of the day, it's just for fun, and might help you consider a different perspective when you're next role-playing. Science rules, stay critical, stay curious. See you next time.
There you guys go. So, what do you guys think? Which is it? Here's the video, by the way, guys. Go ahead and throw it a like and a sub if you enjoyed the content. Great video, great video. Man, he went into like biology, and he went into, I mean, he took it deep. He went hard on that one. I think it's the last one, man. Just for like appeal, man. He went to, that's what she said. He went, no, he did. He went, I think it's like number 3, right? They just got it for sexual appeal. You know, that's it. That's the lore answer. You know, there's not, the milk thing doesn't seem to work, right? And the sap thing doesn't make sense because the history existing, and if they go to the boobs for the sap rather than the history, they have one less reason to commute. I don't know, man. It sounds to me like number 3. You know, mating ritual, like the birds, right? He showed the birds. But if it's for sexual appeal, what about their faces? You know, but see, the thing is, to an Argonian, you know, that face is beautiful. You know.